What's up, everyone? It's Brian from the Exact Cybersecurity and IT YouTube channel. Welcome to another video. We help educate you about cybersecurity, make you aware of the threats out there and what you can start doing to protect yourself and your business. So in today's video, we're going to discuss one of the most prolific ransomware groups out there today, the ransomware group known as Clop. So if you could, like the video, subscribe to the channel before I get into it. I'm going to educate you about this ransomware group called Clop, why they're so successful, and what the government is saying and rewarding cyber defenders if they can bring these guys down to the tune of $10 million. So let's get into it. Clop Ransomware Group, they have been one of the most prolific ransomware groups in 2023. They've been around for a little while now, but in 2023, they have really taken advantage of a lot of vulnerabilities that exist out there. We first saw it Fortra Go Anywhere campaign, and now we're seeing it with this Move It vulnerability. Both file transfer tools used in businesses and enterprise and government and municipal government and schools. We're seeing a lot of entities get hit because of these vulnerabilities between these two pieces of software, and this group has really taken advantage of it. I did mention at the top that there is a $10 million bounty placed on this group by the US government, that if you can help bring this group down, you can share into that 10 million or get it all yourself. You happen to be the one person who does get it. That's how serious. That's one of the first times that we've seen the government come out and put a bounty out on a group if they can bring them to justice. One of the things I like to work off a lot when I do these videos is advisories released by either CISA, FBI, joint advisories. This happens to be a joint advisory released by CISA, which is part of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice. Link in the description directly to the PDF. They updated this article on June 16, 2023. I'm recording this video on June 22nd, 2023, so just 6 days ago. The security advisory is re-released to remove old Fortra Go Anywhere campaign IP addresses and add new IP addresses. And then it also is giving us more information about the Move It file transfer vulnerability. The advisory goes on to say the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency are releasing this joint CSA to disseminate known Clop ransomware IOCs, which are indicators of compromise, identified through FBI investigations as recently as June of 2023. So this is pretty fresh information here, guys. According to open source information, beginning on or about May 27, 2023, Clop Ransomware Gang, also known as TA505, began exploiting a previously unknown SQL injection vulnerability, which has since been given a CVE number of 2023-34362, and Progress Software, the maker of the software, managed file transfer solution known as Move It. It is an internet-facing web application, and they were infected with a web shell, which essentially is a fancy word for malware that allows somebody to get control of the system. That shell was named Lemurloot, which was then used to steal data from underlying Move It transfer databases. In similar spates of activity, TA505 conducted zero-day exploit-driven campaigns against Excelion's file transfer appliance devices in 2021, and also Fortra Linoma Go Anywhere MFT servers in early 2023. So this group loves to jump on top of 0 days and vulnerabilities that are discovered in what they know are going to be internet-facing applications or servers. You can't use these tools without putting them on the internet. Now, can you do it more securely than we're seeing across the board today? Absolutely. But people are just getting these things out there so they work. They're not really considering security. It's more about business processes and making money. The FBI and CISA encourage organizations to implement the recommendations in the mitigation section of this CSA to reduce the likelihood and impact of the Clop ransomware and other ransomware incidents. Again, yeah, Clop's not going to be the only people exploiting it. They're just the ones who are having tremendous amounts of success right now. Going into it, this TA505, unlike if you hop over to my Royal ransomware video that I did about 2 weeks ago, this group operates as a RAS, or a ransomware as a service, and has acted as an affiliate of other ransomware as a service operations, as an initial access broker selling access to compromised networks, as a customer of other IABs, and as a large botnet operator specializing in financial fraud phishing attacks. That's what we know about this Clop group, or TA505. The CSA goes into a little little bit about what happened in 2021 with TA505 and the fact that they used several zero-day exploits to install web shells on internet-facing Accellion FTA servers. The recent exploitation of the MOVEit transfer as a SQL injection vulnerability was used to install the web shell. So they're very good at figuring out how they can get this web shell installed in your environment. In late January 2023, the Clop Ransomware group launched a campaign using a zero-day vulnerability, now cataloged as CVE 2023-0669, to target the Go Anywhere MFT platform. The group claimed to have exfiltrated data from Go Anywhere MFT platform that impacted approximately 130 victims over a course of 10 days, which I covered pretty extensively here on the channel and on my podcast, Security Squad. Clop's toolkit contains several malware types to collect information, including the following: flawed AMI or flawed Grace remote access Trojan, which collects information and attempts to communicate with command and control servers to enable the download of additional malware components. They also use something called SD-Bot remote access Trojan, which propagates the infection, exploiting vulnerabilities and dropping copies of itself in removable drives and network shares. It also is capable of propagating when shared through peer-to-peer networks. SD-Bot is used as a backdoor to enable other commands and functions to be executed in the compromised computer. This malware uses application shimming for persistence to avoid protection. So that's really scary what I just read there, and I'm going to break it down for you. This bot, which acts as a Trojan in your network, is basically designed to replicate itself and hide itself from detection from your IT or your cybersecurity personnel. And it's also able to exploit vulnerabilities at the same time. That's a dangerous tool. If it gets on your network, you could potentially be in a lot of trouble eradicating that from your systems. They also like to use something called TrueBot, which is a first stage downloader module that can collect system information and take screenshots. Developed and attributed to the Silence Hacking Group after connecting to the C2 infrastructure, TrueBot can be constructed to load shellcode or DLLs, download additional modules, run them, or delete itself. In the case of TA505 or Clop, TrueBot has been used to download Wall Grace or Cobalt Strike beacons. Cobalt Strike is used to expand network access after gaining access to the Active Directory server. This is just another tool that they're downloading onto your network and using to try to move horizontally or laterally in your network, and also download and install other things like command and control servers. They also like to use a tool called DEWMODE. DEWMODE is a web shell written in PHP, and it's designed to target Accellion FTA devices and interact with the underlying MySQL database, and is used to steal data from compromised devices. Simply put, they're automating hacking your environment once they know you have these tools in place. LemURLoot is a web shell written in C# designed to target the MOVEit transfer platform. The web shell authenticates incoming requests via a hard-coded password and can run commands that will download files from MOVEit transfer system, extract its Azure system settings, retrieve detailed record information, create, insert, or delete a particular user. When responding to the request, the web shell returns data in a gzip compressed format. This is interesting. They build a tool that can go out and it can do all these things that I mentioned, which is basically exploit the vulnerability in that MOVEit transfer software. But the other thing, if you listen to what I said, they also said it can extract its Azure system set, which means if you are interfacing this in any way, shape, or form with a Microsoft 365 tenant, they could potentially steal data and infiltrate information from there, or gain information that they shouldn't about your Azure or your Microsoft cloud environment through this whole vulnerability that they found. So not only do you need to be concerned if you have MOVEit, but you also need to be extra concerned if you've connected that in any way with Microsoft 365. MOVEit transfer vulnerability. We're going to dive into that. MOVEit is typically used to manage an organization's file transfer operations and has a web application that supports MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, and Azure SQL database engines. In May of 23, the Clop ransomware group exploited a SQL injection zero-day vulnerability to install a web shell named LemURLoot on MOVEit transfer web applications. The web shell was initially observed with the name human2.aspx in an effort to masquerade as the legitimate human.aspx file as part of the MOVEit transfer software. So this file exists normally in MOVEit, and they created something that looks similar to it so it didn't stand out to somebody who may be looking at this. Upon the installation, the web shell creates a random 36-character password to be used for authentication. The web shell then interacts with its operators by awaiting HTTP requests containing displaying a header field named xsilloc comment, which must have values assigned equal to the password established upon the installation of the web shell. After authenticating with the web shell, operators pass commands to the web shell that can do the following: retrieve Microsoft Azure system settings and enumerate the underlying SQL database, store a string sent by the operator, and then retrieve a file with a name matching the string from the MoveIt transfer system, create a new administrator privilege account with a randomly generated username and login, and real name values set to a health check service, and delete an account with login name and real name values set to health check service. Essentially what they're saying here is they have full control of the system at this point, but they can get a lot of information about your systems, about your files, and use that information from the database to then steal data, among other things. Progress Software announced the discovery of the MoveIt transfer vulnerability and issued guidance on known affected versions, software upgrades, and patching. Based on evidence of active exploitation, CISA added the vulnerability to the known exploited vulnerability catalog, otherwise KEVs, on June 2nd, 2023. This MoveIt transfer critical vulnerability exploit impacts the following versions of the software. Basically, anything created prior to 2023.00 is impacted by this. You can see the full list in the PDF that I have linked in the description. So as I scroll through here and look through some of the code that they've provided as some information, the MoveIt transfer detects indicators of compromise, and you have a lot of information here to see if you've been compromised in any way by looking for these files or looking for certain code in your environment if you use MoveIt. So what do you need to be looking for? Well, I already mentioned one of them, and that's the human2.aspx file. If that exists in your environment, pretty good sign that you might be in a little bit of trouble with it. There's also indicators of compromise go anywhere, which is way more extensive than what we're seeing with MoveIt. Email addresses that we're seeing that Clop uses to communicate with are either on rsv-box.com, support-molt.com, or Gmail. They have several malicious domains that are being used for the purpose of committing this whole entire crime from start to finish, whether that's sending you to places to download things or to communicate with you to negotiate. They also have MoveIt campaign infrastructure IP addresses listed. You're going to want to take a look at those, and just to kind of give everybody a heads up on what you can do with this information proactively, you can go into filters that you hopefully have in your environment, either on the firewall or maybe on the endpoint, and you can block communication to these IP addresses. Yes, they change the IP addresses because they know that people are going to hopefully respond. Good idea to maybe think about doing it, or monitor for these IP addresses to make sure none of your endpoints are connecting to them. Same thing with the Go Anywhere, the Fortra campaign. They also have a slew of IP addresses you're going to want to take a look at there and potentially get those into a monitoring or a block list. And then we go to the attack techniques, or the MITRE attack techniques that are listed in here. Exploit publicly facing applications. They also use phishing. So Clop actors are sending large volumes of spear phishing emails to employees of an organization to gain initial access. They also use command and scripting interpreters, mainly PowerShell, SD-bot as the backdoor to enable other commands and functions to be executed in the compromised computer. Command and scripting interpreter. They use TinyNet, a small open source interpreter that establishes a reverse shell to their command and control server. They use shared modules, TrueBot, to download additional modules. They got this well thought out, guys. I mean, if you get hit with this, or you have one of these vulnerabilities that exist, the chances of them being successful with an attack are very high, because the different things that they have in place and the way that they're fetching this from different servers and getting it onto your network is very well thought out, very clever, very done in a way to evade detection. So when they are found out, it's usually because something really bad is happening, like ransomware or file exfiltration at a mass scale. Clop actors are gaining access to MoveIt transfer databases prior to escalating privileges within a compromised network. That's pretty important. Clop actors use TrueBot to load shellcode, and Clop actors delete traces of TrueBot malware after it's used. Can't find it. And Clop actors use TrueBot to sideload DLLs. Clop actors are using Cobalt Strike to expand network access after gaining access to the AD server's Active Directory. They're also been observed attempting to compromise the AD server using SMB vulnerability vulnerabilities with follow-on Cobalt Strike activities, basically companies that we go into and they're still using SMB1 or they think it's no big deal to turn that on. Very exploitable and they're looking for this. Clop ransomware actors have been observed using remote desktop protocol to interact with compromised systems after initial access. Yes, having RDP exposed to the internet is a really bad idea, but also just having it on in your own internal network, even if it's not exposed to the internet, also a bad idea because this is how guys like Clop move around from computer to computer. Clop actors are using TrueBot to take screenshots in an effort to collect sensitive data, trying to figure out who you are, what you're doing. Maybe they can get a screenshot of something juicy that they might want to sell. They're using flawed AMI remote access Trojan to communicate with their C2, their command and control server. Clop actors are assessed to use flawed AMI remote access Trojan to download of additional malware components. Let's talk about what you can do to mitigate this Clop ransomware group. And God, this list is going to be long. And this isn't going to be anything that I haven't talked about in previous videos. It goes into greater detail about some of the things that I've pointed out multiple times. To reduce the threat of any malicious actor, not just Clop, audit your remote access tools. This is part of your identify portion of your framework. If you're going to follow like the NIST framework, you need to identify what the heck is on your network, not only from the tools that you use and the data that you need to protect, but also do we have stuff on the network or on our computers that really maybe shouldn't be there. So making sure that things like RDP are completely shut off and closed off for anyone to use. Reviewing logs for execution of remote access software. Being able to detect abnormal use of programs running on your network is increasingly becoming more important. Not many companies are able to do this or are doing it today. Use security software to detect instances of remote access software only being loaded into memory, meaning it's not being installed. It's just being run from the RAM on the system. Require authorized remote access solutions only be used from within your network over approved remote access solutions such as a VPN or a virtual desktop interface. Basically saying stop leaving RDP on and stop leaving it on to where it's not monitored. Block both inbound and outbound connections to the IP addresses that you're seeing, and don't let your users connect to every single computer and IP address in the world. Have some content filtering going on so they can't get to everywhere on the internet, because not everywhere on the internet, even the surface internet, I'm not talking about just the dark web, the surface internet is a really bad place, and you need to make sure that you can control where your employees are going so you don't have a bad day one day. Implement application controls to manage and control execution of software, including allow listing remote access programs. This is a great idea. This is kind of getting you towards zero trust, something a lot of companies are not doing that we see out there in the world today. But very, kind of easy to implement at this point, and it's a really good idea. Oh, strictly limiting the use of RDP and other remote desktop services. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. I already talked about that. Disable command line encrypting. Great idea. A lot of people don't do this either. Simple to do. Don't let your average user, your regular users, have access to these tools that hackers love to use. We call it living off the land. Don't let that happen. Block access to these tools for regular users. They usually don't need to use them anyway. They don't even know how to use them. Restrict the use of PowerShell. Same idea. Use group policy, use tools. Don't allow it to be accessed. They can't access it. You're not making it easy for them. I'm not saying this is a silver bullet, because depending on how things are in your environment, you can reactivate these things. And hackers can reactivate them, but don't just leave it there for them to use in the first place, because they're going to use it. Update Windows PowerShell or PowerShell Core to the latest version and uninstall all earlier versions. God, if you don't know that, there you go. PowerShell, old versions, bad. Make sure you're on the latest version. Review domain controllers, servers, workstations, and Active Directories for new or unrecognized accounts. One of the things we do here at Exact IT is we monitor for these accounts when they're created. As soon as they're created, an alert goes off. Boom. And then you know something's going on if somebody from your organization did not create those accounts. Reduce the threat of credential compromise. Place the domain admin accounts in the protected users group to prevent caching of password hashes locally. That's a great one right there. That's the hash. Very easy thing to do with Windows to exploit other computers in the environment if they can get that hash password. They don't even need to have the real password. Don't allow administrators to cache that password, which simply means they won't be able to log on if the computer can't connect to the Active Directory server. It's going to give them an error. If you don't have that turned off, you can log in without communicating the server. It remembers the last password that was used, or it caches it, and you can use that password to log onto that system again if it can't, for some reason, connect to the Active Directory server. So that's important. Refrain from storing plain text credentials and scripts. Whew. Man, software vendors are even guilty of that one. So hopefully, if you're building your own software, if you're writing your own code, you're not storing passwords and plain text in that code. Implement time-based access for accounts set at the admin level or higher. Yes. Don't allow somebody to log in at 1 o'clock in the morning if you don't operate at 1 o'clock in the morning. Pretty simple. In addition, authorities recommend that network defenders apply the following mitigations to limit potential adversarial use of common system and network discovery techniques and to reduce the impact of risk of compromise. I'd love to know if you've been affected by Clop, if any of this is making sense to you. Maybe you've been hit with Clop and you're hearing this and seeing this and saying, man, we wish we would have done all that or known that before. Love to hear it in the comments. But here's what CISA recommends the rest of the way. Implement a recovery plan. Great idea. You got to know how to recover once you detect that you have a problem or once ransomware hits you in the face, and that's how you detect it. Maintain offline backups of data. Well, you're not going to have a great recovery plan if you don't have those backups. So it kind of goes hand in hand there. Require all accounts with password logins to comply with the National Institute for Standards and Technology, otherwise known as NIST, for developing and managing password policy. Here's what they say to do. Little nugget inside of this video for you. Use longer passwords consisting of at least 8 characters and no more than 64 characters. Store passwords in hash format using industry-recognized password managers. Add password user salts to shared login credentials, meaning that there's a word in there somewhere that you're adding to the password. So if somebody does happen to breach the password manager, they still don't have the full password. Avoid reusing passwords. Goes without saying. Implement multiple failed login attempt lockouts. I say set that really, really super low. If you have an administrator that's logging them incorrectly 3, 4, 5 times, it's awkward then. Single password hates, mentioned that in other videos, and refrain from requiring password changes more frequently than once per year. Now, the NIST guidance suggests favoring longer passwords instead of requiring regular and frequent passwords. Frequent password resets are more likely to result in user developing patterns cybercriminals can likely decipher. Like you're just incrementing, I mentioned this before, you're incrementing the number by 1, you're incrementing the special character by the next one down on the keyboard. All different things. They don't want you changing your password all the time. What they really want you focusing on is using separate and unique passwords on every site. If you're doing that, then you don't need to change your password all the time. However, if you're not doing that, then I still recommend that you change your password regularly. Otherwise, your password is going to end up getting compromised. Require administrative credentials to install software. That's a big one. We still have people fighting on that on us today. People really need to get educated around that and understand that, that's one thing that stops like 95% of all ransomware and bad things from happening is administrator credentials are required to do anything on a system that requires what we call elevation. CISA goes on to suggest that you require multi-factor authentication for all services to the extent possible, particularly for things like mail, email, virtual private networks, and accounts that access critical systems and critical data. Keep all operating systems and software and firmware update. Timely patching is one of the most efficient and cost-effective steps an organization can take to minimize its exposure to cybersecurity threats. Yet we still see companies not doing this on a regular basis. Segment your networks. Good luck there. A lot of companies need to get on the ball with this. Network segmentation can help prevent the spread of ransomware by controlling traffic flows and access to various subnetworks by restricting adversary lateral movement. That is 100% true. Identify, detect, and investigate abnormal activity and prevent potential traversal of the indicated ransomware with a network monitoring tool. Good idea. If you want to go Google something, go Google EDR or endpoint detection and response. That's how you deal with that. Install, regularly update, and enable real-time detection for antivirus software. Always a good idea. Disable unused ports. Always a good idea. Consider adding an email banner to emails received from outside of your organization. Good idea. Disable hyperlinks in received email. I agree with that. Ensure all backup data is encrypted and immutable. Make sure they can't get to it, because the first thing that these guys go for are your backups. On top of that, make sure you're testing your backups. You don't want to find out that your backups don't work in the middle of a ransomware event. Make sure you're validating all your controls. That's the big thing here, is that you got to validate everything that you think you're doing. I gave you a long list here that CISA recommends. Reach out to a professional, reach out to my company if you need help with this stuff. There's no way that you can do this on your own. Don't expect your IT people that you currently have to be able to accomplish all of this on their own. A lot of the stuff that they're recommending requires what we call a step 1 in the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is identify. You need to identify the things on your network that have, as I mentioned, like disabling unused ports. Well, if you don't know what ports you have open across your network, you're not going to know what you need to disable. So you have to go through a process, through a thing called a risk assessment or a cybersecurity risk assessment that identifies these things for you and brings them to light so you can deal with them. I hope you learned a lot about the Clop Ransomware group, what they're doing. Quite frankly, they don't sound much different in terms of how to stop them like they do other ransomware groups. So that's good news for businesses. They just need to start doing something. Unfortunately, this group has gotten really good at exploiting certain vulnerabilities that exist with certain software, especially ones that seem to move files across the internet. We'll see where this goes. It's very prolific. We'll see if anybody gets the $10 million from the United States government for bringing down this group. One thing I can tell you this, when this group does go down, which they will, because they'll either just steal so much money from so many people that they have to break up because the heat gets so hot, or they'll just decide to break up on their own, or the government, one of the governments around the world might step in and take some of these guys down. But I can guarantee you this, they will fracture, they will reorganize, and they will be back better and stronger than ever. We thought we were on the other side of the curve with ransomware at the end of 2022. And I said to a lot of people, hold the phone. I don't think that that's the case. And here we are in 2023. Vulnerabilities have never been higher than ever. Ransomware has never been higher than ever. And the ransomware groups that are being successful have never been paid as much money as we've seen in the past. And they've never been more successful than they are today. This is just a huge sign that businesses are way behind in securing your data. So we need a concerted effort from individuals like you who might be watching this video, and businesses and government to work together to get better around this stuff and do the things that CISA recommends. They put out advisories like this all the time, guys, and it seems to fall on deaf ears. And hopefully you can share this video out with your friends so everybody who owns a business starts to understand that they have a role to play in stopping these ransomware groups from stealing so much money from U.S. businesses. So I'll see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.